Սիրելի բարեկամներ, այսօր հadoop ծրագիր ունենք ցեզի համար։ Մենք ստուդիոյեն դուրսն ենք եւ դուք դիտում եք Tonight with Sarian show. Իմ հյուրս է իմ շատ մտերիմ բարեկամս Congressman Sherman-ը Sherman-օքսից։ Ինքը հայասեր եւ հայության համար շատ աշխատանքներ դարած է։ So ուրախ եմ այսօր, even though ստուդիոյի մեջ չենք այսօր, բայց իմ հյուրս է եւ դի զրուցենք իմ Հայաստանի եւ Ամերիկահայ թաղուտի մասին։ Շնորհակալ եմ։ Congressman, it's really an honor for me to have you on my show. We've been friends for a while.
A long time.
You've been very supportive, big supporter of the Armenian community, and I'm pleased for you to be with us. We're gonna.
Well, I want to congratulate you on acquiring Horizon Television, and I want to thank you for your service to the Southern California community, both in terms of healthcare and in terms of communications and everything this TV station can do.
Thank you. Thank you. Even though they're two different businesses, but at the end of the day, we serve the public.
Exactly. And what connects them is you personally doing the work.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about some domestic issues, even though our viewers are Armenian Americans and they're concerned about Armenia, genocide, and this, but first we're American citizens, and what happens in this country is of utmost importance to them. I listened to President Trump's speech tonight, and I was concerned that we are trying to increase our presence in Afghanistan, which is 17 years going in a war, countless American lives being murdered there. And what's your opinion? Should we increase our troops there? Should we get out?
Well, first I want to give your viewers a little bit of background. I've represented most of the San Fernando Valley for 20 years in the United States Congress, and for all 20 years have served on the Foreign Affairs Committee. To me, the key thing is not how long a war lasts, or even how many troops we have deployed, that's important, but what are the casualties? And last year we had 17 killed in action, I believe is the figure.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan. Now, our military, being in the military, is dangerous work even if you aren't in a war zone. Our training, the equipment, that's designed not for the safety. I mean, we try to worry about the safety of our soldiers and sailors, but it's designed to defend the country. And we have many hundreds and hundreds of casualties everywhere in our military. And in Afghanistan, our troops are not always on the front line. And in fact, being killed by the Taliban is one of the lowest risks that our soldiers and sailors face.
But, casualties happen.
Yes.
Suicide bombers,
So to me, the first question is, can we design a policy in Afghanistan that prevents it from being used as a base to attack us? And can we accomplish that with low American casualties?
Is it possible?
Well, I do think that the policy of having, and over the last few years, we've had sometimes fewer than 10,000, sometimes more than 10,000 troops. I think a policy of helping the Afghan government, if you can do it at a reasonable cost. If you came to me and said, look, Kabul's going to fall unless we deploy 100,000 troops and incur major American casualties, that would be a different story.
But that's not the case.
That at this point we have to. At this point, if it would be the case if we didn't do a bit more, but I think that if we can,
So the president so we need to increase our presence.
It's a good investment in American security if it can be done with low casualties, moderate cost. We're into absolutes. We liked World War II. It started with Pearl Harbor. It ended with the total defeat of our enemies and our American occupation of most, and Allied occupation of most of Germany and all of Japan. That's not all the way the world works. Rome had an empire. They patrolled their borders. they had casualties every year, century after century. But there were differences. There were circumstances where entire legions were wiped out. That's a terrible year. That's a terrible policy. Those legions should not have been sent into Germany at that time by the Roman Emperor. And then there were years in which you had skirmishes, but you defended an entire empire at reasonable cost. Now, I don't think America is an empire, but we do have this enormous reach, these enormous interests, and it is very different to say, well, the Vietnam War lasted so long and we had casualties each year. Yes, we had casualties of 500 a week for years, deaths. Whereas Afghanistan last year, 17.
Still 17.
When I'm saying, look, that matters.
Lost.
But we have troops in doing exercises in South Korea. We've got a major exercise coming up. And even if everything was calm and we didn't face a nuclear threat, and obviously we do, but even just carrying out that exercise, even if it was done calmly, it's a dangerous thing. So you're dealing with bombs and weapons and helicopters, and when we order that exercise, moving tens of many thousands, well over 10,000 troops from one place to another and engage, there's going to be casualties from that. You cannot operate your military without casualties, even if the enemy doesn't shoot at you. Helicopters, ships, jet fuel, bombs, bullets, these are dangerous things.
Okay, you mentioned North Korea. I'd like to ask about North Korea. You think the president handled it well, the North Korean situation?
Well, he hasn't done anything except inflame the situation.
But it's calm now after his fire speech.
Well, I mean, if you go 2 weeks and it's not on the front pages of the newspapers, that doesn't mean it's calm. It just means the newspapers have something else to report. We've had a bad policy toward North Korea for 20 years, and we've seen them go from no nuclear weapons and no missiles to probably 20 nuclear weapons, the capacity to create several new nuclear weapons every year, the capacity to smuggle those weapons into the United States, and now, soon, the capacity to use missiles. So that's been 20 years of bad policy. And inflaming it doesn't make it any better.
So
it
that's
just makes it
both
worse.
administration. I mean, Republican and Democrat.
There's only one way to deal with the North Korea. North Korea is more economically productive now than it was 20 years ago. It's harder to deal with. But the only way to deal with it is to make China change its policies. So far, we've only asked China to change its policies. As long as China can continue to subsidize North Korea on the one hand and continue to sell goods in the United States business as usual, that is what they will do. And the other problem we've had with our policy is that we always try to get more than any peaceful strategy can accomplish. Right now, our official position is they've got to get rid of all their nuclear weapons and all their missiles.
But they're not going to do it.
They're not. If we had a policy that got them to freeze both of those programs, that would make us safer 3 years from now than if they continue to build more missiles and more nuclear weapons. But instead of working for a freeze, we keep saying we're going to work for elimination, and for 20 years we haven't accomplished it at all. And the reason they're not going to give up their nuclear weapons is Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons, and his program was more advanced than we realized. He turned the whole thing over to us after 9/11 because he knew that we were ferocious at that time. Saddam Hussein gave up his nuclear program. They're both dead.
So this guy's afraid, Kim Jong.
Kim Jong-un, we know we're the good guys, but our enemies don't view us as the good guys. We know that we act from principle. They just see aggression. And Kim Jong-un has every reason to be afraid. As a matter of fact, back in the George W. Bush administration, they wanted to sit down with us and negotiate a non-aggression treaty. just a treaty where both sides agree not to attack each other. And it was Cheney who said no. He looked forward to the day when American troops would liberate North Korea, and the Kim family knows that means death for all of them, and the whole constellation, their whole top 500 people would probably be either forced into exile or death.
Do you agree with Trump's foreign policy in Syria, in Iraq? Talk about North Korea, maybe Russia, which is a hot topic.
Well,
what's your opinion on that?
Well, to some extent, it's a continuation of our old policy, just dressed up differently. To some extent, it's amateurish. What we did in Syria is, I think, exactly what Obama would have done, and the two worked together. Obama got Assad to give up almost all his chemical weapons, but he saved some, and then when he used that, we punished him for it. But we avoided a military confrontation with Russia, and we've avoided American casualties. We are waging an effective war against ISIS. Those are all good
things.
They're
losing ground everywhere.
ISIS is
Mosul
losing
is
ground.
liberated.
And Raqqa will be soonish, not. But on the other hand, Assad is a murderer. He ought to be gone. But I don't think that Americans are willing to incur hundreds and thousands of American casualties to achieve that goal. There are many things that are important to accomplish in the world that aren't worth the casualties and the cost of doing them.
Is it worth our efforts to get rid of Saddam? Is that our policy, to get rid of him and his family?
We would like to, if our efforts are modest or don't expose us to the risk of hundreds and thousands of casualties. It's an important thing to do. This is a man who has driven millions of his people into flight, into refugee status. This is a man who is responsible for the overwhelming number of 500,000 Syrians who have died. On the other hand, he is certainly treated Christians better than ISIS would.
Right. That's what I was going to come next.
And better than other Brotherhood-influenced organizations would. I think as a practical matter, you're not going to dislodge Assad.
Russia's supporting him.
You've got the Russia and the Iran
supporting it.
And the fact that Americans are not willing to incur casualties. But you might be able to force Assad into a more reasonable approach to governing his country. And if we support, it's difficult to find good elements in Syria, but to the extent we find them and work with them, well, we can create facts on the ground that will lead to a diminished role for Assad. Maybe an exit of him personally, if not his entire clique. But the idea that we could dislodge Assad completely at a reasonable cost to the United States. And when I say cost, it's not just the casualties you suffer if things go as you plan. In this case, it's also the risk that you end up in a thermonuclear war with Russia. Now, I think that's a slight risk, but by God, it's got to be factored into your decisions.
If Russia says Assad is off the table, it's not negotiable, we're going to keep him there, what would our position be?
Well, so far, our position has been, if he doesn't use chemical weapons and doesn't interfere with...
He did.
He did, and we punished him for it. He hasn't done it since.
Right.
Obama threatened him. He gave up most of his nuclear weapons. Trump hit him, and he stopped using whatever he had left. But that's... we have an interest, regardless of who wins in Syria, regardless of the Syrian people, which are very important to us. We have a worldwide interest in protecting the Convention Against the Use of Chemical Weapons. So if the word gets out, well, you may win your war, you may lose your war. You may be a good guy, you may be a bad guy. But if you use chemical weapons, you get punished. That keeps those weapons off the table. And I think it's important to do that independent of what happens to the Syrian people. It seems clear that in eastern Syria, forces that we're working with will operate and dislodge ISIS from a lot of territory, probably Raqqa. But the majority of the Syrian people live in the western part of the country, and it appears as if Assad will be very powerful there. And what I begin to see is an area stretching from Lebanon through Iraq where national governments may not exercise total monopoly on force in particular areas. I mean, Iraq, you're going to have a Kurdish control of some areas. You're going to have some Sunni tribes in other areas. You're going to have the government based in Baghdad in the south and middle central part of the country. And on a map, it'll say a unified Iraq. And if they can avoid killing each other, we'll call it a peaceful Iraq. But it's not going to be a circumstance where the government in Baghdad controls every military force in the country. And Lebanon is to some extent, in a good year, Lebanon is a country that's peaceful, but there are different military and militia elements in different parts of the country.
You mentioned the Kurds. Should the Kurds have their own country? And there are 20 million plus Kurds in Syria, in Turkey, and Iraq.
If I was Sykes and you were Pico, we would have drawn the map differently, and the Kurds would have their own country. That being said, changing borders is a very dangerous and difficult thing to do. And at this stage, though, the very existence of the Kurdish population in northern Iraq is because we protected them from Saddam. We have been very helpful to the Kurdish people, although we haven't fought to give them full independence. We've got to make sure that the Kurds protect the Christians in their area.
They are.
And
I mean, that's the safest area.
Well, I mean, if you compare
the
them,
Yazidis, the Christians, the Assyrians, they were safe.
If you grade them on the curve and say, well, this is how bad ISIS treated Christians, Erbil is wonderful compared to Raqqa. But I've talked to Assyrian groups who still feel that that the Kurds are not treating the Assyrians, but clearly better than any other group.
Better.
Yeah, and so we should be providing aid directly to the Kurdish regional government.
Barzani announced that he wants to have a referendum on independence in September. Should that continue?
I can't see how doing that this year makes this year easier for the United States.
I mean, they were our best allies. I mean,
they were, and we were their best allies too.
It's not I mean, vice versa.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kurds were the best soldiers. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're the ones fought.
And they're the ones fighting ISIS now, in eastern Syria. Yeah.
I want to move into some domestic issues because we talk a little bit about foreign policy.
Right.
We
could talk for much longer.
We have Armenian communities in Syria, in Iraq, in Turkey. So I mean,
and
Turkey
you should know that I've been fighting for every effort to arm Christian self-defense forces in Iraq, to be mindful of the Christian communities in Syria, and constituent service efforts so that those in the Christian communities of those countries seeking refuge in the United States are able to get here.
On domestic issues, why do you think Trump did not come strong on this neo-Nazis and white supremacist group? I'm shocked.
He was weak, then 2 days later he was strong, then 2 days later he erases and goes back even worse.
It's like a zigzag. I mean, it goes back up and down. I mean, I can't explain that.
There's a tendency that Trump has to view the world as people who like Trump and people who don't. And if you like Trump, you must be a good person. And if you don't like Trump, you must be a bad person.
So if a white supremacist likes Trump, he's a good person.
If you showed up in Charlotte to see that demonstration and you put aside a revulsion with the Klan and the Nazis, and you just said, which of these two opposing groups likes Trump better? I know those anti-Nazi protesters. We see that the Klan and the Nazis are trying to embrace Trump as their road to legitimacy and inclusion in the American political process.
But this should not be known.
And the fact is,
right,
what Trump has got to realize is that whether you like Donald Trump is not the sole judge of human merit. The fact is, there's no such thing as a good Nazi. There's no such thing as a good Klansman. And even if they wear signs that say, "I love Trump," that doesn't mean he can like them. And just because the anti-Nazis, for the most part, did not vote, well, overwhelmingly did not vote for Trump, that doesn't mean they're wrong. The second thing is this equating that Trump has done of a statue of Robert E. Lee with George Washington. Now, Washington owned slaves, but he did a lot of very important good things for our country. And then a stain on this incredible record is the fact that he owned slaves. Robert E. Lee did nothing that any of your viewers can mention other than wage war against the United States for the purpose of protecting slavery. So with George Washington, maybe there's a footnote on his statue. There's a footnote in the, not just a footnote, there's a chapter. In the if you're going to write a biography of him. But it's, and the fact that he owned slaves should diminish the size of his statue or the number of his statues. But Robert E. Lee, if you take away the defense of slavery, what else? Why else do we have a statue? I mean, he was president of a small Midwestern college, and maybe he should have a statue next to the other presidents of that small Midwestern college.
Սիրելի բարեկամներ, իմ հյուրս է Congressman Brad Sherman-ը, Sherman Oxից, մեր հայու բարեկամ եւ իմ լավ ընկերս։ Այսօրվա մեր թեման է քաղաքական հարցեր Ամերիկայի համար, վերջը պիտի խոսենք Հայաստանի մասին։ Առայժմ պիտի զրուցենք իրադ Հայաստանի քաղաքականության եւ Ամերիկայի քաղաքականության մասին։ Congressman, we discuss a fair amount of domestic issues. For our viewers, Armenia and Armenian-related issues are very dear. Obviously, the majority of our audience are Armenian Americans. And first and second, maybe even third generation, in terms of my daughter is the third generation, my dad being the first generation. Why is U.S. having such a hard time recognizing genocide? I mean, that's first thing so dear to every Armenian, universally. I mean, they agree on one thing. They say, look, you know, Pope did, European countries, 46 states. Why do we have such an issue with this?
Well, I fought for the congressional recognition of the Armenian genocide since I arrived in Congress in 1997. In that year, I was successfully able, for the first time, to get us to give aid to ARTSOC. But as to the genocide, they wouldn't even put it on the congressional schedule. And the Turks have a tremendous amount of power in Washington.
Even today?
Even today. Well,
all the crazy stuff Erdogan is doing?
Yes, shedding American blood on American soil. He has two or three bases of power. One is a Pentagon that just looks at the world, and just some elements of the Pentagon look at the world like it's a chessboard, and they see that Turkey's in a good spot. So they say, let's be friends with whoever controls that. The second is oil companies, whether they be doing business with Turkey or with Azerbaijan. And the third is the government of Turkey spending a tremendous amount of money. You know that General Michael Flynn lost his position in significant part, and may even go to jail, may be pardoned, we don't know. But his biggest crime in terms of the criminal code was hiding the fact that he had gotten $500,000 from the government of Turkey. I mean, through a corporation that was laundering it for the government of Turkey. and he was going after Gulen. I don't know much about this leader Gulen, except I know that Erdogan.
He's here in Pennsylvania.
He's here. I know two things about him. He's in Pennsylvania, and Erdogan hates him. Erdogan.
But they were at some point.
Oh yeah, they were together.
They were together.
Now,
Islamists,
yes,
and they split.
So now that Erdogan hates him, I like him more than before.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody hates Erdogan.
If the only thing to know about him is that Erdogan hates him, that's a good thing. That's a good first step in somebody's bio. Getting back, so you've got this tremendous pressure, and then you have the mainstream media. I managed, I served on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 20 years, and we had one success, but a partial success. Back 10 years ago, we got the committee to vote in favor of recognizing the genocide.
But it never went to the full House.
And it never went to the full House. I was the manager at the committee, and we lined up that votes one after the other, and we barely got it through the committee. And then once we got it through the committee, the mainstream media had editorials that basically said, isn't it stupid to upset Ankara over talking about history? And look at what the Turks will do, and look at how strategic they are.
What would Turkey do if tomorrow?
What did they do to France? They threatened.
Exactly.
They threatened France. Other countries care first and foremost about their pocketbook.
Of course.
France was threatened with a boycott of their goods, that they weren't going to be able to sell to Turkey. After they recognized the genocide, they tripled their exports to Turkey. These are paper threats.
So why? Who's saying this? There's a State Department, Defense Department saying these?
It's oil companies, an extremely well-funded Turkish lobby, and a mainstream media that just buys into the issue of, and not here in Los Angeles. I mean, the LA Times is our mainstream,
right.
But 500,000 Armenian Americans live here, and
right.
They know that, and they're members of their editorial board who understand
in California, other states.
But in other states, with small Armenian American populations, they just sit there as armchair diplomats and say, look, Turkey looks like an important country, why upset them? And since they don't necessarily know an Armenian family in this or that city, that's the editorials they write. And we, in general, Democrats have been supportive, but not all, and Republicans have not been supportive, although some have. But that's how the partisanship breaks down, and the oil companies are part of that.
Part of that.
Yeah.
How about aid to Armenia and Artsakh?
It's not as robust as it should be, but it's closing in on $2 billion over since independence. And as I said, I led the effort to give aid to Artsakh. The State Department fought against that on the theory that if we're providing aid to the people of Artsakh, we're kind of recognizing the independent Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. And to use Silicon Valley lingo on this, to me that wasn't a bug, that was a feature. Mm-hmm. The fact that there was some implicit recognition of the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, now renamed Artsakh, was another reason to do it. But the main reason to do it is here were people who had suffered through a war and needed some humanitarian assistance. So we fight every year for more aid for Armenia, and I'm also fighting for that whatever aid we do give to the Republic of Georgia, that a significant portion goes to Jabak. Mm-hmm. And so that
this is a large Armenian community
exactly
in
that
Jabal.
is, exactly,
and they're not well treated, even though they're Christian Georgians. But our language, our cultures needs to be preserved and protected.
Yeah. So Armenians in the Caucasus tend to live in 3 different legal entities: the Republic of Artsakh, the Republic of Armenia, and the Javak area within Georgia.
If there is tomorrow attack Armenia, what would U.S. do? I know it's a hypothetical question, but it did happen last April. They had a full-fledged war.
Our first reaction would be to try not to be involved, and if the Republic of Armenia can defend itself,
which they did,
and we hope they will always be able to do, then there isn't a question. You don't come to the defense of Armenia if Armenia can defend itself.
Would U.S. give military aid to Armenia?
Oh, gee. If Armenia was subject to aggression, we should, but I'm not sure we would. The same forces that prevent us from recognizing the genocide would be there. And the oil companies are even closer to Baku than they are to Ankara.
I know there's an issue with Russia and U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's some elements within Congress views Armenia as close to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
However, most Armenians are pro-Western.
Mm-hmm.
Most Armenians have families in U.S. and Europe. What is your take on it?
I think that the relationship between Moscow and Yerevan is not all that well understood in Washington. When people think of Armenia, they think of a conflict with the Turks, both East and West.
Right.
And they're very, very aware of that. And the fact that Armenia has a relationship with Russia is not really well known.
Because without Russian aid, without Russian weapons, Armenia will not be able to defend itself.
The Russians play both sides.
Exactly. They also, that's what was going to come.
Without Russian aid and without Russian weapons,
give to both sides.
Baku would not be so aggressive. Yeah, they're there, but I think those who are aware that Armenia must live in its own region, and that is a region in which Russia will always play an important role. It's a huge country located very close. And there's also a very large Armenian population in Russia.
Exactly.
So
over 3 million.
Which is way more than the number living in Armenia.
In Armenia, unfortunately.
So I think that I don't sense that there is some effort to have sanctions against Russia, etc., but I don't see any of that being focused on Europe.
I know you're trying to eliminate the double taxation in Congress through legislation to help Armenia. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, by background, I'm a CPA and tax lawyer. I know the importance of international tax treaties for international investment, international trade. And we have tax treaties preventing the double taxation of profits. You know, if you do business in two countries, you want to give
taxed on both sides.
Right. You know, maybe half your profits are earned here and half are earned there. You pay taxes on half and a half, but you pay taxes on the whole profit in both places.
Exactly.
You have nothing left for yourself.
Right.
There is a tax treaty that we had with the Soviet Union that has some continuing force, but doesn't address some of the important issues. And I have been pressing for the last administration, and I get these opportunities in hearings to have the Secretary of the Treasury there, and I've used that the last 4 times, including Steve Mnuchin, the new trade, who unfortunately is not Armenian.
He lives in LA. Maybe he has some Armenian friends.
But it's really a matter of the work to sit down with the other country and work out the treaty. We have done that with all our most important trading powers around the world and some other countries that are about the size of Armenia. And it's about time that, and it's a chicken and egg situation. They say, well, we don't have a lot of international business and investment with Armenia, therefore we shouldn't do the treaty.
But there's Armenian
Therefore, if you don't do the
Americans willing
treaty,
to do
right,
business there in
exactly,
Armenia.
and it's a chicken and egg. If you don't do the treaty, you don't get the commercial activity, and because you don't have the commercial activity, you don't do the treaty. That's crazy. So, but it's not just that. We spend American taxpayer dollars to help Armenia. The least we could do is pay a couple of tax lawyers in the Department of Treasury to fly to Yerevan. That'd be the cheapest foreign aid thing we could do.
Is this a Treasury regulation?
This
or
is
it's a Congress act?
This is purely the Department of Treasury. It's their allocation of resources. This isn't a statute. This isn't a regulation. Sometime this year, their international tax lawyers will sit down with some country and try to work out a tax treaty. And they might pick, for all I know, they might pick Paraguay instead of Armenia.
Have you ever visited?
And by the way, I have no idea what the Paraguay situation is.
No, I see. One last thing I'd like to, two things actually I want to discuss. Number one, Turkey and Armenia. Do you ever, maybe I'm the eternal optimist. I believe at some point in my lifetime I'm going to see Turkey recognizing the Armenian genocide. It's the right thing to do. Like Germany did recognize the Holocaust. And came to realization that, look, 6 million people were banished. Same thing with Turkey.
And that's been my presentation to my colleagues. Germany is a great ally of the United States.
Exactly.
A very important ally of the United States. If Germany were to tell us to tear down the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., we would be outraged. We wouldn't do it. So we wouldn't deny the history of World War II, even for the biggest economy in Europe. Turkey, much less important than Germany.
Right.
And we are denying history of World War I for them.
Exactly.
That's our moral power in the world comes from standing tall and telling the truth. And we give that up every day by not recognizing the genocide. But also, I know that many of your viewers probably don't want to help Turkey. But you know what would really help Turkey? Recognizing the genocide. Look at Germany today, because they came to grips with their past.
Exactly.
Today's very effective, very prosperous, very democratic, very law-abiding Germany is a product of that. And today's economically beleaguered, unstable, authoritarian Turkey is a product of a people that has not come to grips with their past. If Turkey wants to be as law-abiding, as stable, as prosperous as Germany, the first step is to recognize the genocide, and it would help them a lot if that's what they would do.
I know,
but I should mention what I think Turkey may do before that is to lift the blockade of Armenia. That I think that would come first. And
I mean, it's a good first step showing.
Absolutely. And it not only does it cost them nothing, in every way, it makes money for them. Their blockade of Armenia is simply outrageous, and to have a country claim to be our ally while blockading another one of our allies is outrageous.
Last thoughts. I mean, almost we're at the end. I know you talked about bringing impeachment against Trump.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what he has done that's impeachable, his offenses.
Well, there are a number of things he's done that are reckless, perhaps racist, wrong. They are not impeachable offenses under the U.S. Constitution. Now, every other country in the world almost that's a democracy has a parliamentary system.
Right.
And we'd have a very different outcome there.
The Parliament would vote him out.
Yeah,
the
vote him
Prime Minister
out, and there's a Republican majority, and they would vote in a more mainstream Republican reflective of the parliamentary majority. We have a different constitution, and so recklessness, racism are not impeachable offenses. Just not having the confidence of the parliament is not an impeachable offense. But high crimes and misdemeanors are. And so you look at the criminal code of the United States, you will see that obstruction of justice is very carefully defined, narrowly defined, and is a felony. It applies when you use threats to stop or halt or impair an ongoing FBI investigation. In February, Trump threatened Comey in order to get him not to investigate Flynn. And Flynn's biggest identified crime is the $500,000 he took from Turkey and then failed to report, as if nobody would notice. These forms you fill out for a security clearance, security clearances are very serious.
He didn't disclose it.
And yeah, when you fill out a form to get a security clearance and you miss the fact that somebody bought you a lunch, they'll forgive you for that. Somebody bought you a house, $500,000, you have to put that down. That's a crime. Then second, he fired Comey and said that the reason he did it was to curtail the investigation of Russian collusion. Again, you can't fire an FBI director for the purpose of interfering in the investigation. Now, you can fire him for other reasons. If Trump had just kept his mouth shut, I wouldn't be able to point to this as a high crime and misdemeanor or a violation of the criminal code. But and then finally, to the New York Times, he threatened Mueller, and this is a little less clear, but he appears to be threatening Mueller by saying, if you expand your investigation into my personal finances, I will fire you, which is a third effort, perhaps, to constrain the investigations. And people ask me, do you have the evidence? Well, I wouldn't file articles of impeachment until I saw the sworn testimony of Comey. Most of that testimony he had already leaked to the New York Times.
Right.
But a leak to the New York Times is not under penalty of perjury.
Perjury, yeah.
I was there to hear his whole presentation. It was under oath. That's solid, take it to court evidence, penalty of perjury evidence. Then his comments about why he fired Comey are on videotape with Lester Holt, the interviewer. And then finally, his threats to Mueller, they're on the audio tape published by the New York Times. Usually in a criminal investigation, you don't get sworn testimony from one of the most important law enforcement officers in the country, plus audio tape, plus videotape. You'd be lucky to have any one of those three if you were a prosecutor doing any other crime. So my hope is that by seeing articles of impeachment, the staff around him will use that as one more reason to sit down with him and say, look, you got to get yourself under control. You got to stop these impulses. I don't know if that'll happen. Watergate is an interesting case study. A year after the burglars were discovered, articles of impeachment were filed. And a year after that is when the Judiciary Committee voted.
It's almost a 2-year process.
Right. And articles were midway through that process. A year after the cyber burglary of the DNC was discovered, I have filed articles of impeachment, and one would expect a year before we get a vote in the Judiciary Committee. And keep in mind, back with Nixon, we had a Democratic majority in Congress. So if anything, you'd expect it to move more slowly now than it did with Watergate.
But does he still have the support of the Republican majority in both houses?
Support is not a binary thing. Only computers is at ones and zeros. Human beings are analog. He has some level of support. If you talk to a Republican and say, do you like the fact that he nominated Gorsuch for the Supreme Court? Yes, would say most of them. Do you say these comments about Charlotte? Oh my God.
They're all...
And so there's a range, and there's a certain fear if Republican members who seek re-election need the support of those who are most loyal to Trump. And I would suspect that as long as Trump remains in the 30s as to his level of support, the Republican members will not have a political reason to, it would take really a lot of political courage for Republican members. If his support dips down into the 20s, then the politics point in the other direction. And so it depends. Trump's fate is in his own hands. If he doesn't have to act like Barack Obama. He just has to act like Republicans would say, okay, that's a reasonable way for a president to act. If he meets that very low bar, I think he stays in office, at least through the end of his of this one term that he's been elected to. But he's just one Twitter tirade away from
going down.
Yeah. Or maybe 5 Twitter tirades. I don't know.
We're almost at the end.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts to our Armenian community?
I just want to talk to those who live or who have relatives in the San Fernando Valley. It's been my honor to represent most of the San Fernando Valley in Congress. If people have issues, they should, an issue with every federal agency, whether it's a visa for a relative or the IRS or Medicare, give us a call at 818-501-9200. And I'm Brad Sherman from Sherman Oaks, and that's where our office is located, in Sherman Oaks.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Սիրելի բարեկամներ, այսպես կվերջացնենք մեր այսօրվա հայտակիրը, համտիպենք հաջորդ անգամ։ Շնորհակալություն։